All right, welcome back, everyone. We're diving right back into it with part 2 of our daily UPSC Current Affairs analysis.
And it's April 9th, 2025, for those keeping track.
That's right, April 9th.
Yeah.
We've got a whole bunch more to cover today. And remember, some of this might sound familiar.
Yeah, we might have hit on some of these points before, but that repetition is a good thing for your UPSC prep.
Exactly. Think of it as a good revision session built right in. Okay, so we've got a lot to get to, from some pretty big advancements in technology to some new environmental policies and even a really interesting development in biotech.
We'll break it all down in a way that's hopefully both clear and engaging for you.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. First up, we're looking at this push for what's being called inclusive AI growth.
Right, and the UNCTAD Technology and Innovation Report for 2025, this report really lays it out. I mean, it shows just how big artificial intelligence is going to be. Like, we're talking a global market of almost $5 trillion in the next decade.
Yeah, that $4.8 trillion figure by 2033 is just massive. It's clear that AI is becoming a major economic force, but the report also brings up this point about 40% of jobs globally being impacted.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin, right? We've got these productivity gains, but there's also this concern about job displacement. And that's something we really need to think about, especially in the context of India and its workforce. It's a pretty big deal for anyone looking to understand the UPSC landscape.
For sure. And there's this imbalance the report highlights. Like, a huge chunk of the money going into AI research and development, something like 40%, is concentrated in just a handful of companies.
Yeah, mainly in the U.S. and China. And when it comes to private investment, the U.S. is dominating with about 70% of it.
Wow, that's a lot. So does that mean other countries like India are at risk of falling behind?
Well, it definitely raises some concerns about equitable access to these technologies, right? There's a potential for this digital divide to just keep getting wider. So for India, it's really about being smart, forming partnerships, building our own capabilities, so we're not just relying on what other countries are doing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure India is not just using AI that's developed elsewhere, but actually shaping its future. Making sure it addresses the specific needs and challenges we face here. The report talks about a way forward on inclusive AI. What does that look like?
So one of the big things they emphasize is tailoring AI solutions to the specific digital infrastructure available in different regions. And for India, we have this really diverse range of connectivity and technological penetration. So it means developing AI that can actually work even with limited bandwidth and in all these different local contexts.
So kind of like making sure the AI is adaptable and can work in different environments?
Exactly. And then another really important aspect is this idea of lowering the skill barriers to AI adoption. I mean, if AI stays in the hands of just a small group of experts, then its potential for widespread positive impact in India is really limited. So we need to focus on education and training and making sure people have the skills they need to work with and develop AI.
Right. So it's about democratizing access to these tools and making sure everyone can benefit. And what about international collaboration?
Yeah, that's another key piece. For India to really thrive in the AI space, we need to build partnerships, to learn from others, share resources, and adopt best practices. And this last point, the report really hammers this home. We need to focus on a worker-centric approach. It's not about replacing humans altogether, but about finding ways for humans and AI to work together, to be more productive and create new opportunities.
It's more of a collaboration than a competition.
Exactly. And for anyone prepping for the UPSC, think about how all of this ties into India's existing initiatives for skill development and digital transformation. These are all connected.
Okay, so it's really about finding that balance between human capabilities and AI working together to make things better. And the role of the government here seems pretty important, right? They need to be setting the direction and making sure this growth is inclusive.
Absolutely. The UNCTAD report, it highlights how important it is for governments to really understand their national AI readiness. They break it down into 3 key areas: infrastructure, data availability and quality, and the skilled workforce. India needs to have a clear picture of where we stand in each of these areas to create effective policies and allocate resources strategically. It's that kind of national level assessment that's the first step towards building a robust and inclusive AI ecosystem.
Okay, so looking specifically at India now, what were some of the key takeaways from the UNCTAD report?
Well, in the 2024 Readiness for Frontier Technologies Index, India was ranked 36th. Now, that does show some progress, but it also tells us we still got a ways to go when it comes to really effectively adopting and using these advanced technologies, like AI.
Right, room for improvement. But there was some positive news too, right?
Yeah, definitely. India's got a huge pool of talent. In 2023, there were something like 13 million developers on GitHub in India. That's a lot of people with the potential to contribute to AI development and adoption.
That is a massive digital workforce. And I know the Indian government has also launched some specific initiatives in this space, right?
Absolutely. The report mentions the India AI mission, which launched in 2024. The goal is to build a really comprehensive and inclusive AI ecosystem within the country. It's focused on promoting research, development, and the widespread adoption of AI across different sectors. And it's not just theory. The report actually gives a real-world example. Tata Steel has already integrated about 250 machine learning systems into their operations.
Wow, that's impressive. So AI is not just a futuristic concept in India. It's actually being implemented and making a difference right now.
Exactly.
Okay, let's switch gears now to something completely different, something that feels like it's straight out of a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
The de-extinction of the dire wolf. Colossal Bioscience has just made this incredible announcement, and it's got everyone talking.
It's pretty mind-blowing, right? I mean, the dire wolf extinct for thousands of years, and now, in a way, it's back. These 3 dire wolf pups, they represent a huge step forward in de-extinction efforts.
What's fascinating to me is the method they used. It wasn't traditional cloning, like you might think.
Yeah, no, it's not like they just found some ancient dire wolf DNA and created a perfect copy. It was way more complex than that.
So what did they do?
Well, they did use techniques related to cloning and analyzed ancient dire wolf DNA, but the main way they created these pups was through gene editing. They took endothelial progenitor cells, or EPCs for short, from gray wolves, which are the closest living relatives of dire wolves, and they used gene editing to kind of nudge those cells toward the characteristics of the extinct dire wolf.
So they used the gray wolf as a starting point and then edited the genes to make them more like a dire wolf.
Exactly. It's considered a more targeted approach and maybe even less ethically complicated than traditional reproductive cloning, which would involve creating an exact genetic copy of an existing or extinct organism.
I see. For those of us who aren't, scientists, could you explain the basics of cloning a little more? I think we hear about it a lot, but it can be kind of confusing.
Sure. So cloning, at its heart, it's about creating a genetic duplicate. There are 2 main types: reproductive cloning and therapeutic cloning. Reproductive cloning is focused on creating a whole, living organism that's genetically identical to a donor organism. Dolly the sheep, the first cloned mammal, that was an example of reproductive cloning.
Oh, right. I remember hearing about Dolly.
Yeah, and they achieved that using a technique called somatic cell nuclear transfer, or SCNT. Basically, they take the nucleus of a cell from the donor animal and put it into an egg cell that's had its own nucleus removed.
Okay, so they're replacing the egg cell's DNA with the donor's DNA.
Exactly. There's also another method called embryo splitting, where you divide an early-stage embryo into identical halves, and each half can then develop into a separate individual. Now, therapeutic cloning, that's a bit different. It's not about creating a whole organism, but more about producing embryonic stem cells that are genetically matched to a patient. These cells can then be used for research or potentially for therapies.
So in the case of the dire wolf, they went with this gene editing approach, using the gray wolf as a template, rather than trying to directly clone a dire wolf from ancient DNA.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction.
It definitely brings up some ethical questions, doesn't it? I mean, bringing back extinct species.
Yeah.
Is it really a good idea?
It's a huge debate, and there's no easy answer. There are a lot of concerns about the potential for these de-extinct animals to be treated as novelties, like commodities instead of living beings. And there are broader concerns about messing with the natural order of things, about the unintended consequences that could come from bringing back species that have been gone for so long.
Yeah, like how would they fit into existing ecosystems?
Exactly. And then there's the question of resources. Is this really where we should be putting our time and money? Could those funds be better used to protect endangered species that are alive today?
Makes you think. And are there any philosophical or ethical frameworks that can help us think through these issues?
There are. Some people look to Kantian ethics, which emphasizes treating individuals as ends in themselves, not just as means to an end. So in this context, it raises questions about the motivation behind de-extinction and the potential impact on the animals themselves and the ecosystems they might be reintroduced into. There's a lot to unpack ethically here.
Absolutely. And colossal biosciences, they're not just stopping with the dire wolf, right? I think they've got other de-extinction projects in the works.
Yeah, they're pretty ambitious. They're working on bringing back the woolly mammoth, the Tasmanian tiger, and even the pink pigeon, which is a bird native to Mauritius.
The pink pigeon, wow. And for that project, I read that they're using something called primordial germ cells. What are those?
Primordial germ cells, or PGCs, are basically the cells that eventually develop into sperm and egg cells. They're kind of special because they carry the genetic information that gets passed down to future generations.
Okay, so they're like the starting point for the reproductive system.
Exactly. So for de-extinction, scientists are trying to isolate these PGCs from a living relative of an extinct species, like the pink pigeon in this case, and then they introduce genetic material from the extinct species into those cells. The hope is to then use these modified PGCs to produce offspring that carry the traits of the extinct animal. It's like injecting the past into the future, genetically speaking.
That's pretty wild. All right, let's shift our focus now to something a little closer to home here in India. The Central Pollution Control Board, the CPCB. They've just revised how they classify industries based on how much they pollute. This feels like a big move in terms of environmental policy, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. So they've now got a total of 419 industrial sectors categorized into 5 different categories: red, orange, green, white, and a new one called blue. Red has 125 sectors, orange has 137, green has 94, white has 54, and then blue has 9. It's crucial for anyone preparing for the UPSC to understand these classifications because it's directly linked to environmental regulations and industrial policy in India.
Right. It gives a framework for how industries are regulated and managed. Now, this isn't totally new, is it? It's a revised version of something that already existed.
That's right. It's based on the Pollution Index, or PI, which they first came up with in 2016 to standardize how industries are categorized across different states in India. The big change with this revised methodology is that they're now giving equal weight to the scores for water pollution, air pollution, and hazardous waste generation.
So it's a more holistic approach looking at the overall environmental impact.
Exactly. It's about getting a more comprehensive and balanced assessment of an industry's footprint, making sure that no single type of pollution is given too much importance in the classification.
That makes a lot of sense. Tell me about this new blue category. What kind of industries fall under that?
So the blue category, it's a bit unique. It's specifically for what they're calling essential environmental services, basically things related to managing waste from homes and households.
Okay, so these are services that are inherently about dealing with waste.
Right. And they see these as vital for public health and environmental protection. Some examples are things like sanitary landfills, integrated sanitary landfill projects, and common sewage treatment plants. Those all fall under the blue category.
Those definitely sound essential. What about those compressed biogas plants, the CBG plants? Where do they fit in?
So with CBG plants, it depends on the type of feedstock they use. The CPCB said that if a plant uses feedstock that has a high chance of littering, things like municipal solid waste, agricultural residue, energy crops, and weeds, then they might be considered under the blue category because they're helping to manage those waste streams.
I see. So if they're using waste that would otherwise be a problem, they might get that blue designation.
Exactly. But if a CBG plant is mainly using industrial or process waste as feedstock, then they'll still be under the red category. It seems like they're making a distinction based on what kind of material is going into the plant and how likely it is to cause other environmental problems.
That seems fair. Now, are there any incentives for industries to, do better environmentally? Do they get anything out of this new classification system?
Yeah, there are some positive incentives in place. If an industry can show that they've successfully implemented good environmental management practices and are complying with the standards, then the CPCB might extend their environmental permits. It's a way of rewarding companies that are actively trying to minimize their impact and follow the rules.
So it's not just about penalties, but also about recognizing and incentivizing good behavior.
Exactly.
To help our listeners visualize all of this, could you give some examples of industries that fall under each of these colored categories?
Sure. So in the red category, which has a pollution index above 80, you've got industries like cement manufacturing plants, integrated automobile manufacturing, and distilleries. Those are typically large-scale operations with a high potential to pollute.
Okay, so the heavy hitters in terms of environmental impact.
Right. Then in the orange category, with a PI between 55 and 80, you've got things like brick manufacturing units, dry cell battery production, and coal washeries.
So still impactful, but not quite as high as the red category.
Exactly. Then you've got the green category with a PI between 25 and 55. This includes sectors like manufacturing, compact discs and computers, and chilling plants. These have a more moderate pollution potential.
Got it. And what about white?
White, with a PI below 25, includes industries that have minimal pollution potential. So things like assembling air coolers, making cardboard from recycled paper, and producing medical oxygen.
So relatively low impact industry. So we already talked about blue, which is those essential environmental services.
Right, so that gives you a pretty good overview of how the CPCB is now categorizing industries based on their pollution potential.
Okay, that's really helpful. Let's talk about something else now. This push for saline aquaculture. It seems like a really interesting way to use land that might not be good for much else, land that's affected by salinity.
It is. Saline aquaculture is all about farming aquatic organisms in inland areas that have high salt levels, areas that are often unsuitable for regular farming. It's a way to make those lands productive and generate some economic activity.
What are the advantages of this approach, especially for a country like India?
Well, there are several. Firstly, it can create jobs, especially in rural areas where saline land is common and people might struggle to make a living from agriculture. Secondly, by using these lands for aquaculture, we can increase the total amount of fish and shrimp we're producing, which is good for food security and the economy.
So it's about diversifying our food production and making the most of the resources we have.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about a small niche here. There's a lot of potential for this in India. In Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh alone, there's something like 58,000 hectares of land that could be used for saline aquaculture. But right now, only about 2,608 hectares are being utilized.
Wow, so there's a lot of room for growth there. And India is already a major player in global aquaculture, right?
We're the second largest producer of cultured shrimp in the world, and shrimp exports are a big part of our seafood export earnings, about 65%. So saline aquaculture could really help us boost that even further.
So is the government doing anything to encourage this?
Yes, they're actively trying to promote saline aquaculture. For example, they've increased the allowed size for these farms from 2 hectares to 5 hectares, which makes it more economically viable for farmers. They've also set up a national-level committee to come up with a roadmap for how to develop saline aquaculture sustainably in those affected states in North India.
So they're trying to create a supportive environment for this to take off.
Right. And there are some other initiatives, too. They're looking at improving the marketing infrastructure for these products, like with the proposed integrated aquapark in Sirsa. And they're also trying to leverage the network of Krishi Vigyan Kendras, or KVKs, to help identify suitable areas and give farmers the technical guidance they need to adopt this practice.
For anyone preparing for UPSC, it's worth remembering that KVKs play a big role in agricultural extension and technology transfer in India. But even with all this support, there must be some challenges.
Oh, definitely. Farmers face a lot of obstacles. On the policy side, things like the lack of adequate subsidies and the potentially high cost of leasing land can be a real deterrent. And then there are input-related challenges. The initial setup costs can be pretty steep. Maintaining the right salinity levels in the water is tricky. And getting hold of high-quality seed for fish and shrimp species that can thrive in saline conditions, that can be difficult too.
So it's not as simple as just throwing some fish in salty water and hoping for the best.
Not at all. And then on the output side, there's the lack of well-established marketing channels and the fact that prices can be unpredictable. So there are risks involved for the farmers.
It sounds like a complex equation with a lot of moving parts. Okay, let's move on to our rapid-fire update section, where we'll briefly touch on some other important developments you should know about for your UPSC prep. First up, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, or FCRA.
Yeah, the Ministry of Home Affairs recently reminded organizations registered under FCRA that they need to get prior permission before accepting any foreign contributions. They also changed the validity periods for FCRA registration. So the period for receiving foreign contributions is now 3 years, and the period for using those funds is 4 years.
Okay, so they're tightening up the rules and timelines around foreign contributions.
Exactly. It's important to remember that the FCRA was originally enacted in 2010 to regulate how individuals, associations, and organizations accept and use foreign contributions. The goal is to make sure those funds aren't being used for anything that could harm national interests. And then the 2020 amendment, that made things even stricter. They added provisions like prohibiting the transfer of foreign funds within India and setting a limit on administrative expenses.
So greater scrutiny and control over how these funds are managed.
Right. And certain groups are totally banned from receiving foreign contributions, like election candidates, journalists, and government servants.
So those are the key points on FCRA. Next up, we have the National Social Assistance Program, or NSAP.
So the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, they recently released a report looking at how effective the NSAP has been in reducing poverty. They recommended increasing the budget for the program and stressed the need to make sure it's being implemented properly on the ground. The NSAP, launched in 1995, is fully funded by the central government. Its goal is to give financial help to vulnerable people like the elderly, widows, people with disabilities, and bereaved families living below the poverty line. It has 5 main schemes under it.
What are those 5 schemes?
They are the Indira Gandhi National Old Age Pension Scheme, the Indira Gandhi National Widow Pension Scheme, the Indira Gandhi National Disability Pension Scheme, the National Family Benefit Scheme, and the Annapurna Scheme. So a pretty wide range of support for those who need it most.
Absolutely. We also saw that the Pradhan Mantri MUDRA Yojana, or PMMY, just completed 10 years. We've talked about this before, so think of this as a quick refresher.
Yeah, good point. The PMMY was launched in 2015 to provide funding to small and micro enterprises that aren't incorporated and aren't in the farm sector. These are businesses that often struggle to get loans from traditional sources.
So it's about supporting entrepreneurship at the grassroots level.
Exactly. And they offer collateral-free loans of up to 20 lakh through various institutions like banks, NBFCs, and MFIs. The loans are categorized based on the amount: Shishu for up to 50,000, Kishore for between 50,000 euro 5 lakh, and Tarun for between 5 lakh and 10 lakh. And then they added the Tarun Plus category later for loans above 10 lakh and up to 20 lakh.
So a pretty flexible range of loan options.
Yeah. And the PMMY has had some really impressive achievements over the past decade. They've sanctioned a huge number of loans, over 52 crore, worth more than 32.61 lakh crore in total.
That's a significant injection of funds into the MSME sector.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the numbers. The scheme has also empowered women entrepreneurs. About 68% of the beneficiaries are women. And it's also promoted financial inclusion by reaching out to entrepreneurs from SC, ST, OBC, and minority communities.
That's fantastic. It's really about creating opportunities and leveling the playing field.
Definitely.
Okay, moving on. There's been a concerning development with the small hive beetle being recorded in India for the first time.
Yeah, this is not good news for our bee populations. The small hive beetle, scientifically known as Athena tumida, it's originally from sub-Saharan Africa. It doesn't usually cause much damage there, but in other parts of the world it can be devastating to honeybee hives.
Yeah, it's an invasive species with the potential to wreak havoc.
Exactly. It was found in West Bengal, and we need to keep a close eye on this. It's a small, oval-shaped beetle, reddish-brown to black in color. The real problem is the larvae. They feed on the pollen, honey, and even bee eggs stored in the hive, and their waste contaminates the honeycombs, causing the honey to ferment. It basically makes the whole hive unusable, which can lead to the collapse of the colony.
So it's a serious threat to our bee populations and the honey industry.
Absolutely.
On a different note, China seems to be making some headway with their research on gas hydrates.
They are. They're building the world's first permanent undersea research station that's specifically for studying gas hydrates. These are kind of like ice, but instead of just water, they also have gas molecules trapped inside, usually methane.
Interesting. So is this a potential source of energy?
It is. They're considered unconventional hydrocarbon resources, and there are huge amounts of these gas hydrates in marine sediments and permafrost regions. India also has gas hydrate reserves, mainly in the Andaman Islands and the Krishna Godavari offshore basin.
So this could be important for our future energy security.
Exactly. If we can figure out how to extract them safely and economically, it could be a game changer.
And speaking of game changers, IIT Kharagpur has come up with a new technology using graphene.
Yeah, this is really cool. Researchers there have developed an energy-efficient way to separate oil and water using graphene. This could be a really big deal for things like managing oil spills and cleaning up industrial wastewater.
Graphene seems to be this wonder material that everyone's talking about.
It is. It's basically a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a honeycomb pattern. It's incredibly strong, lightweight, transparent, and it conducts heat and electricity really well. And it's flexible, too, so you can use it for all sorts of things, from electronics to energy storage.
Wow, it sounds like it has almost limitless potential.
And now we can add environmental remediation to that list.
Okay, shifting gears again. Portugal was in the news recently because of a high-level visit.
Yes, the president of India just finished an official visit to Portugal. For those who need a quick geography refresher, Portugal is on the western edge of mainland Europe, on the Iberian Peninsula. It shares a border with Spain and is bordered by the Atlantic Ocean to the west and south, Lisbon is the capital city, and it's one of the oldest cities in Western Europe.
So steeped in history and culture.
Absolutely. Portugal also has a maritime temperate climate. The north is more mountainous, and the south has rolling plains. The Tagus River, the longest in Portugal, runs through it. And the highest point is Ponta do Pico, which is actually on one of the Azores Islands.
Interesting. And then there's this classified naval project, Project Varsha.
Yeah, that's a pretty secretive initiative. The goal is to strengthen India's underwater nuclear capabilities.
Yeah.
They're building a secure underground base on the east coast in Rambili, Andhra Pradesh, to house and support our fleet of nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, the SSBNs. It's a really crucial project for maintaining a strong nuclear deterrent.
So a high-stakes strategic development. And finally, there's been some movement in the volatility index, or India VIX.
Right. The India VIX is essentially a measure of how much volatility is expected in the Indian stock market over the next 30 days. The higher the VIX, the more uncertainty there is in the market. It's calculated by the National Stock Exchange, or NSE, using the prices of Nifty options contracts. It's often called the fear gauge because when it goes up, it usually means investors are getting nervous and expecting bigger price swings.
So it's a measure of market sentiment and a signal of potential turbulence.
Exactly. And it's related to the concept of beta, which measures the volatility of a specific stock compared to the overall market. The recent spike in the India VIX, it tells us there's a perceived increase in risk right now and a higher chance of big market movements.
Okay, that was a whirlwind tour of some really important updates. We covered everything from the future of AI and the ethics of bringing back extinct species to environmental regulations, economic developments, and geopolitical events. It's amazing how interconnected all of these things are.
That's a great point, and it's something that anyone prepping for UPSC should keep in mind. As you're studying, think about those connections. How will AI change our economy and society? What environmental challenges and opportunities are we facing in India? How do global events impact us here at home? Those are the kinds of questions that will really help you understand the bigger picture.
I couldn't agree more. We encourage you to dig deeper into any of these topics that sparked your interest. Remember, our goal is to give you a strong foundation and save you some time in your preparation. And if you found this analysis helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more in-depth discussions on current affairs.
We're here to help you succeed on your UPSC journey. Keep up the great work with your studies.